welcome everyone to the lecture. So we will start.
I think, yeah.
Okay. So, dear colleagues, please let me welcome you to another round of the seminar of the Masaryk Institute. It's a pleasure to introduce you a very unorthodox lecture, which will be held by Jan Surman, a fellow at our institute. He's a specialist in history of science. He is the head of two projects which are taking place at our institute. One about images of science and one about Czech-Polish entanglements during the Cold War. And the lecture will be about something completely different. It will be about cows and their breeding in Carpathia.
Almost.
Beskydy.
I will show where it is.
So I won't delay you any longer, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just wanted to start by saying, I mean, it will be an unorthodox lecture because I do not deal with cows professionally. However, I deal with entanglements, and actually the talk originated as a result of within a workshop in which we were talking about entanglements, and I was not extremely happy about how the workshop was progressing, and as a provocation, I thought, like, okay, if we are talking about human entanglements all the time, then I have to do some. I mean, and it was mostly about nationalism and ethnicity. Then I have to do something very, very different. And my idea was, okay, then I did remember that I had something about cows and entanglements. And this is actually basically how this talk started. So it is connected with the Czech-Polish entanglements, and generally with the questions about what is entanglement, how you write entanglement, and how you write entanglements in plural, because I think that's very important, that entanglements here in this talk, there will be a different way, several different entanglements which kind of intersect all the time. So it's also intersectional, interspecies, and so on and so on. Because I started it as a kind of a small provocation, it is also an experiment. I know that there is always an idea that there is a cardinal difference between human sciences or historiography and natural sciences, that historiography, for example, doesn't have an experiment. I totally disagree with it. It's just the way the funding works and the way we have to sell our projects, that we from the beginning don't say what we do, or maybe some of us ask questions like this. I like asking questions from the something that I actually don't know where it will lead me. More theoretically, it is a kind of approach from actual network theory, when you have a kind of a certain point of departure, a sentence, an object, and so on, and you look at what kind of network led for this object to emerge or the sentence to be produced. So at the very beginning, you don't actually know where the story will lead you, and this is actually how it happened. I knew something about the red Polish cattle, and then this led me up until early 18th century England. I didn't know it at the very beginning. And this talk will actually kind of a little bit reproduce this travel. One of the reasons for it is that as soon as we have a narrative of whatever we are talking about, it is a narrative which is a human narrative. It always leads into a certain direction. It is human bound, it is bound to human categories, and so on and so on. And my idea was that I cannot really make a kind of cow-led narrative because of the obvious thing that I don't know what cow and how cow thinks. But I can try to break the human-centered narrative and the way humans tell the story. This is also something which is not completely new. I mean, post-colonial, decolonial theory works with these approaches quite a long time. Why do cows matter? Why is it actually important and interesting to work with cows? And apparently, when I was working on this project, I was more or less for 3 months researching until I said, like, there is somewhere a point I have to stop. Why is it actually interesting and important to do it in year 2024? I mean, there is a literature about cows from at least 19th century onwards. Well, just to start, is because it leads you to the question of actually how, like a bigger question is how the position of meat, how the position of animals has changed in our society over the last years or over the last decades. Cows are important as animals in our economy. If you look at kind of political, social imagery connected with cows, I mean, there is a lot of it. I mean, there is, for example, a lot of merch with Trump making cows great again. But the interesting thing is that, I mean, as soon as you look at the presence of cows in the contemporary society, what people say when they are speaking about cows is actually this. It is, Svičková, whatever, however you call it. The cow is a factory of milk. It's a factory of meat. It's, this is how we see animals, and at least certain animals. And this is also something that I found very interesting. I mean, this is a change which happens roughly in the 1930s. It is connected with economical changes, but it is also connected with social changes. And this is also the moment when I actually understood that I have to stop dealing with red cows because there is a brutality which comes, which I don't really want to work with as a scholar. And if you will now say that you disagree, and no, we are talking about live animals all the time, and this is actually a kind of example, kind of taken and tailored for the Masaryk Institute, are these pictures. You saw these pictures. I mean, most of you saw these pictures in email, actually in 2 emails, and one of them was titled Meat, Miaso, and the second was Nabitka. And in one of them, there was also kind of a package of meat just next to a living animal. So, well, I mean, just to say, I mean, while I'm vegetarian, don't eat meat actually, I didn't feel disturbed with it. I mean, we are living in the same society, and we have kind of this kind of living animal on par with a dead animal. We see it all the time, and actually, if you kind of consider, eating meat, and probably, I mean, if you were thinking about buying this meat, you did. So, I mean, if you have a choice, eat bio meat. So, these cows like this, which are at least a little bit happy for a certain moment of their life until they are shot. So, it's not criticizing it, just saying that, it is an interesting development. I mean, 100 years ago, and with other animals, it actually doesn't work, that you cannot, put an animal in the meat and say, like, this is the same. With cows, it does. It doesn't, for example, with dogs. I could, again, make a joke about Trump, but, I make a lot of jokes about, my dog being eaten, and it kind of, people get offended very fast, as you have, apparently, and this is, of course, a historical development. It is also a cultural development. There are, countries which eat dogs, and then, I mean, for them, this kind of, connection between meat and dog is probably very okay. And this is actually, for me, very interesting to look how this kind of distinctions came into being. And of course, if I would go further, I mean, humans as human animal, and show you kind of picture bringing humans and dog and meat into one, you'll probably have to fire me. This is why I'm not showing it, at least not yet. And also because it's actually very hard to find these images on the net, at least on Google. And we are recording this meeting because when the police comes, I can tell them I was Googling for this kind of special search words for the sake of the lecture, because I know that there are several artists who are playing with this, especially small children as a commodity, which are then presented as dishes. You cannot find them on the internet. I saw them on exhibitions. I was looking like both at the artist and both kind of the description which I just told you, they are not there. I mean, I saw the exhibition 10 years ago. I know very exactly where it was. It's just gone. I mean, cancel culture, may be responsible for it. Anything, in any way, something happens that, at least Google, removes this kind of interest. So I will also do it. At the same time, when I was saying that, this change of perception of animals as meat is historical, it is also changing, I mean, as we are speaking. If you look at, for example, two series which discuss cattle farming. American series, the one on the right is conservative, the one on the left is kind of less conservative. In both series, actually, animals have kind of agency. And they are very recent series. And if I look at what the series like 20 years ago, how they were portraying cattle, it was a very different cattle and very different way of portraying cattle and their agency. So even in a conservative narrative about animals, the conservative dialogue about animals is actually changing as we are speaking. Ranch is like several years old, and Yellowstone is just the next season is premiering now. So these changes are also happening as we are speaking. 2 years ago, a movie called EO was taking kind of an animal perspective on the world and cruelty of the world. This is also not the first time something like this was happening, but the first time the discussion was actually quite global. So, apparently this is a time when agency of animals and kind of non-human, the deeper understanding of what non-human agency is actually happening, not only in the historiography, but also in the popular culture. Sometimes popular culture is actually much faster than historiography. So this was also one of the kind of the points which kind of led me within my experiment to try to look at the animal agency as well. I will come to it at the very, very beginning, at the very, very end of the talk. Okay, to go from a little bit anecdotal to a little bit more professional, one of the yet another origin of the story which I'm telling is connected with this image, which I saw in Canterbury, in a Canterbury Bigley House of Art and Knowledge. Canterbury, much more known for the cathedral, which is very nice, but the museum is also splendid. And then you go into a room and you see a huge picture of Charlie the Bull by Thomas Sidney Cooper. And apparently Thomas Sidney Cooper was painting basically only bulls and animals and cattle. So my question was, how does it actually come that around 1900, the second half of the 19th century, you have a quite good artist, the painting is really good, who is hired by someone to paint huge paintings of a bull. It is anatomically correct, as you see. So, and there's a lot of them. It is so why the bull has such an importance at once. This is not only a British story. This is a bull, Topór Rzeźbiony, from Galicia this time. And he's also already at Polish cattle, or Polish red cattle. And this is a sculpture of him. There is actually a duo. It was a sculpture of him and a sculpture of a cow called Marzula, who both won the 1913 exhibition in Vienna. And they were sculptured. And they were sculptured by an artist called Kazimierz Chodziński, who is known for sculptures he did in Washington, in New York, in Warsaw. So he's a global artist who is an expensive artist at the time, and he's sculpting patriotic motifs and bulls. So again, someone is actually paying a very good artist to make, I think it's a small sculpture. I don't know. The sculpture apparently didn't survive the wars. I couldn't find it in any of the museums. So in any case, but still there is someone who's actually paying a very good artist a lot of money to make a sculpture of a bull. So what is actually happening, again, beginning of the 20th century, that there is an importance for the bull to be sculptures like this. So this was the second point of my entry to the topic. And the third is that most of the history which I will be talking about happens in the region of Galicia, of Western Galicia, where I'm also coming from. And this is the map from the early 20th century of the breeder societies, of the peasant breeder societies. So basically, here you have, somewhere here you have Krakow, here you have Krakow, here you would have Lviv, and here is Bielsko or Bielsko-Biała now. So basically, everything is happening in the region. I'm coming from here, which is a small village called Sułkowice. And this is actually one of the few maps I've ever seen when this village is actually mentioned at all. And there is actually a small city next to the village, and the city is not mentioned, the village is mentioned. So there is also a little bit of local patriotism which is in this project. And the last point, and this is actually kind of the very beginning of the talk. Well, the pointer stopped working, is this one. This is a leaflet from a Polish supermarket called Biedronka. And this is actually kind of, I found it a little bit later, but it's a very good introduction of how I work and what I find interesting. If you don't know what Biedronka is, and you don't have to know what Biedronka is, 2 years ago, no, last year ago was the election, the presidential election last year, 2 years, sorry. The last presidential election of the Czech president, Petr Pavel, went to Poland to buy some stuff in Biedronka. Apparently, it was photographed. It led to a big scandal. And a lot of very interesting memes. So this is basically the shop. The shop is so the connection with the shop is that it's actually a little bit of a cheap shop. So it's not something where you go for the expensive food. And apparently it's not a very it's a shop which doesn't really make a very good research, because there should be a footnote by the text which they have in the leaflet, namely when they are writing that it's a milk by the red Polish red cattle, and it advertises it as a milk of the oldest Slavic breed. And the thing is that there should be a footnote to it, leading to a text that was published around 1900 in German, which actually basically started with the sentence. And then, the very sentence actually traveled through time and space and languages up from a scholarly publication in a scholarly journal to a leaflet in Biedronka. So again, what happens here? And also, well, I mean, I will not be talking about what the oldest Slavic breed means. It's like basically the question whether Czechs or Poles were the primeval Slavs, or whoever was the primeval Slavs. It's just not a very interesting historical question, but it has several interesting things. I mean, at some point of time, someone researches it and says that it was the oldest breed, and also the whole idea of the oldest breed is actually a very interesting idea, because a breed of an animal, as we know it, is actually mostly an invention of the 18th and 19th century. Basically, it is called in the scholarly literature now designing cattle, which means that a certain characteristic of certain group of cows will be made stronger. So, for example, you can develop a cattle so that it is completely red, or it can be completely white. It can be, give more milk, give fatter milk, give more meat, and so on and so on. And I mean, if you think about dog breeds, this is exactly what is happening. I mean, there is someone who has an idea, let's develop the dog into this direction, and then 200 years later, the dog cannot breathe, because it kind of, this is how the development works. So basically, this is, the cow on the left, on your right, the red Polish cow is developing into. It's not like a cow is developing into bulls, obviously, but there is a kind of a, you see already, like from the body, that there is a kind of change in the way they develop. I didn't mention the dogs that cannot breed by chance, because if you think about practices of breeding and designing of animals, this is Great Britain when it actually started. Or not started. I mean, it started probably Mesopotamia much later than Great Britain as a practice, but the scientific description of it and scientification and translated into statistical language happens in Great Britain. Especially it is connected with Robert Bakewell, so middle of the 18th century. What he does is especially these two animals. Longhorn cattle and sheep, especially sheep, are apparently very important for the designing of animals, because apparently they change very fast. And now you can actually ask, how does what does it have to do with Western Galicia in the 19th century. And this is actually the connection. It is that when the professional cattle breeding and animal breeding begins in Galicia, around the middle of the 19th century, the first article discusses the British practices of breeding and British practices of cattle holding and British practices of fodder preparation. So basically, the preparation of food for the cows. You see this very, very square cow. So also this kind of visual imagination that a cow should be square, also travels to Galicia. So exactly here, this article is basically the first article introducing it. And the second article, when I saw about the fodder, it's about the turnips and the importance of turnips for cattle. And it is actually very important because cattle basically is a very deficient. It doesn't produce much money in the 19th century. Here you have two examples of texts which discuss what is actually the main product of cattle in the 19th century. And it is not, as you would expect, milk or meat. It is actually shit / the cattle manure. If you think now where the cattle actually is mostly widespread in the 19th century, it is Alps, Switzerland, Austria, and it is exactly where actually you cannot grow anything. So you put cattle there where nothing else is coming. Sorry, before my computer will crash, I will just put into electricity. And therefore, it is actually very important that middle of the 19th century, there is an agricultural revolution connected with, among others, exactly turnips coming from Great Britain, which allows cattle in a way to be more profitable especially for the nobility. Not only because the cattle doesn't make profit, but also because most of the meat and cattle, which is being used for meat, is coming from Russian Empire, because there is no taxes on the border, there's no customs until 1882. And the nobility actually doesn't have interest in raising the taxes because they are the ones who are doing the commerce. So what they are saying is, okay, let's don't raise the taxes, let's leave the customs as they are, let's invest into our local cattle, and let's help with the breeding. So let's design cattle to be more profitable for us. And this is basically, and what happens is 1882, the customs are raised for political reasons. And at once there is actually a need for a local cattle which produces local meat and which produces local milk also. And this is basically the beginning of the cattle production and the professional cattle production in Galicia. And exactly as I said, this is the moment when the cattle design, the perfection of a local cattle becomes something very important. One of the reasons is that there is some imported cattle, Frisian cattle, for example, and Hessian cattle, which is coming and which is used in Galicia, but they are dying very fast. So there is actually a completely not profitable. So, and there is a local cattle which is there. It is also not profitable because it's mostly it doesn't give very good yield in milk and meat. I will come to it a little bit later, but at least it's not dying. And I will also come to it later. The problem with all these practices of cattle design is that until the middle of the 19th century, they are not really working because they are concentrating only on the previous generations of father and one family and offspring, which is not how heredity works. So basically, by 1970, there is next development discussing distinction between traits which are hereditary or not, dominant traits, not dominant traits, and that you need at least the knowledge of the previous generation on two generations ahead in order to predict what will happen with the next generation of cattle or whatever you are designing. And then there is, of course, Mendel, who introduces statistics. So this happens quite late already in the history of gene telling. And it is also, again, a scientification of a certain, very likely of a certain practice, which in both cases, the case of Galton and of Mendel, they actually met during their fieldwork. So there is some literature also about Bohemian Moravia that the breeders were actually knowing much better, how to breed their cattle, cows, cattle, horses, and sheep than the professionals. They knew that you have to have a description of 2 generations back. But it was mostly about experimenting. There was no statistics and counting involved in this case. But at least they knew that you need to collect certain amount of information in order to be able to plan the next generation. For example, that you have to, you shouldn't let your cow procreate in case the grandfather was, I don't know, for example, had whatever traits you don't want to kind of develop further. Although very often it was connected with the colors. For example, in case of the local cattle in Galicia, it was that if a cow had a white mark, it already meant that it's this white mark will be developing further, so you should actually basically kill the cow. Not because of the qualities which she has, but because of the a mark. We are still talking about 19th century. The knowledge of how animals work and how heredity work is still quite limited. But in any case, you have something developing which is herd books, which is a list of cattle, which is ranging sometimes generations ahead, generations back. If you think, for example, about the herd books of horses, the pedigree, the families of Arabic horses are traced back to the very origin. So they have it from the 18th century up until now, actually. With cows and sheep are actually the first one which are appearing with these books. It is a little bit later, but these descriptions are actually quite accurate. Although I was trying to decipher what triangles mean and circles mean in this very case of this herd book, I couldn't. Apparently, everybody knew what it means. It looks like Alhenia a little bit. In Galicia, the first herd books are appearing also in the 19th century. So first one is about horses, the second one is about cows, and then the first one about cattle is late 19th century. So the collection of the information starts 1895, and it's printed 1913. What you see here is basically the amount of information that they have here, which includes the color, where it's from, the pedigree, it's for bulls, and for cows, the milk, so the amount of milk that is produced, the fatness of milk, and how much days she's lactating, then it's actually changed into how much fat she produces in total. So these are basically the traits that are deemed most important. And then as soon as you have information about it, you can build something like this, which is kind of developmental lines of cows. So this is from the 1930s, which is already, it is the first thorough statistical analysis of how certain bulls influence certain bloodlines in the red Polish cattle, with amazing amount of statistics, which this person, Paweł Szumowski, is actually, so he basically traces the cattle up until 1890s and showing if you enter this bull into the bloodline of this bull, this will happen. If you enter this bull into the bloodline of this bull, this will happen. So basically, something that if you want to think about it, agriculture is a very cattle farming is a very computerized activity right now, and this is actually why you need a lot of statistics, you need a lot of data which are processing, and this is actually what happened already in the 19th century in Galicia. So there is a lot of counting. This is for example how this lines look graphically. So this is one thing for which you need statistics and information. And the second is if you want to develop cattle into a certain direction, you also need to know what a perfect cattle of a certain breed looks like. And for this, you need to measure a lot of cattle and say, this is exactly the way the perfect cattle looks like. Also because, this is the data you can get. You can get some, blood groups and so on. And so you can only use the measurable data. And this is also something that is happening in the 19th century. So basically, the professionals are going to the villages and they are measuring cows and bulls, which actually means that, and this is actually when I'm talking about entangled history, this is actually where the first entanglement I want to talk about is happening. This is the entanglement between peasants and the professionals. And as I mentioned already, the professionals rely already on the practices of the peasants, but they also have to rely on information which is delivered to them by the peasants. For example, the measuring of the amount of milk that a cow produces, it has to be done by the peasants. The amount of fat, it is done by a professional, but on the basis of milk, which peasants have to bring to a certain measuring point. The peasants also say the information about the previous generation and so on and so on. So basically, the professionals and the peasants have to trust each other. While the nobility is the one which is actually having the professional farms in the 19th century, up until basically 1910, they rely very heavily on cows which are bred by the peasants. So they also, especially once they understand that you need to understand that 2-3 generations back, if they are getting a cow or a bull, especially from a peasant, they also want to know the whole history of the family. So basically, also the peasants know that they have to, have the history of the family in order to sell their bulls more expensively. So basically, everybody. So this is actually called the calibration of networks, and data collectors is known for example, earthquake observers. So basically, there's a constant exchange of information between professionals and the laics in this time, peasants and nobility. There is a professions which are getting to it. So there's the whole professionalization of the whole cattle farming, not only at the professional farms, but also at the level of individual peasants. And there is a lot of trust which actually both groups have to have to each other in order for this to function. As I said, you need also these ideas of a perfect bull, of a perfect cow, and this is something which is done by methods of images. This is exactly something which is done by the examples which I showed you at the beginning. You have the pictures of cows, you have the pictures of bulls. This is what you bring to the people and show, or bring the people to it and show. This is how your cow should look like. There are exhibitions which are taking place. Basically, from the end of the 19th century, the Polish red cattle has at least a yearly exhibition. It goes to major, Galician exhibitions. It goes to Vienna to the exhibitions, and whatnot. And this is one of the photos, the images from one of the exhibitions from the first exhibition of the Polish red cows from 1896. And the cow called actually Matsula at the very end. Basically, I talked a lot about historical things around the Polish red cows. If you want a certain timeline of what is happening and the timeline of the professionalization, this is that in 1875 there is a kind of a general idea that the local breed in Western Galicia should be made into the leading breed in the region. The first farms, as I said, the first professional farms opened in the 80s. Then there is a farm by the agricultural school in Chernihiv, which then kind of starts the professionalization of the networks. 1893, the first breeding farms, which specialize actually not on cows, but specializes on breeding bulls. And then 1895 was the first society of breeders of Polish red cows, which then 2 years later makes the first exhibition of the Polish red cows, which is hailed as a great success of the red Polish cows. And then 1913 is the exhibition in Vienna when Matsula and Toburzy are getting the first prizes and it gets captured. By 1913, statistically, the red Polish cattle is actually almost the leading cattle in West America. And it is certainly the most popular one, and the one which is actually most hailed. So, most supported politically also. And the reason for it is very connected with distribution. This is the second entanglement. You probably already saw that a lot of literature which I quoted was in German. Although the Polish red cow is a kind of very Polish cattle. But the three names are actually very interconnected with the history of these cows. The first one is Martin Wilkens, who is first a breeder from Prussia, who starts the first farm of Silesian red cattle. Then he becomes a rector of Boku, so the High School of Agriculture in Vienna, where several of the breeders which we start red Polish cattle are educated. In 1882, he comes to Galicia on a tour, and he's apparently the first one who is saying that red Polish cattle is the cattle which should be supported and designed into the leading cattle in the region. Why? He's saying that this is because of the morbidity. So basically, the red Polish cattle is the cattle which dies, which survives under the most dire circumstances. As I said, that the cattle which was imported was dying very fast. And the red Polish cattle, he says that it will survive even the worst winters without fodder. So this is why we should support it. And because through the conscious design, we can actually get them to be, produce as much milk and meat as we need. And he's remembered for it until basically now. The second one is Friedrich Oldeflies, who is again a scholar from Prussia, professor in Breslau. And he's coming to the first exhibition of Polish red cattle in 1897, as I said, and he publishes an article about it in the Deutsche Landwirtschaftliche Presse, and it's again an article which gets quoted in the Polish literature about red Polish cattle up until now as the first one, the foreigner who is showing us that this is showing also to the world that the red Polish cattle is exactly the cattle which should be perfected, and which already is actually a very good cattle by the 19th century. And the third one, and this is the most important one, and this is also how I can speak also in this content about Czech Polish or Czechoslovak Polish interconnectedness, is Leopold Adamec, who is from Moravia. So this is as Czech as I would go. He is from Moravia, studies in Vienna with Wilkens, again at Boku. And then 1890, he gets promoted, or at least he gets a position. Whether it's a promotion or not, it's debatable. He goes to Krakow. This is only a part of publications which he published about red Polish cattle. So he basically publishes both about the design, but also about the history of red Polish cattle. So he's basically the one who does all the measurements. He goes into the villages every summer. He goes with his students, with his two PhD students. They will be both his successors. He goes into villages and cooperates with breeders. He's going there and taking measurements, teaching people how to make measurements, and so on and so on. He very fast learns Polish. This is why he's actually remembered very fondly. So he's the key person for the scientification of the breed, and he's also the one who apparently is instrumental into establishing the first breeder society in 1895. He also writes about ancient history of the red Polish cattle, and he's exactly the one who wrote about that is the oldest Slavic cattle. He writes in 1893, sorry, and he also says that there is evidence, archaeological evidence which he presents for it, because there is a small debate whether the cattle was taken in the Middle Ages from German migrants to Galicia, or was it endemic cattle? So he says not only it was an endemic cattle, but also this cattle was taken by certain migrants to the south and produced Illyrian cattle. And because people take cattle, and this is the dominant cattle which then becomes, it also means that Illyrians and basically half of the Slavs are coming from Galicia. So he connects the cows with the great ideas of Polish nationalism, and says because the cows are the oldest ones, Polish Polish slavs are also the oldest ones. So this is actually this sentence which then travels very nicely. And as I said, he's very popular, and he's also someone who, gets popular until the very end, until the moment he dies. With a little bit small exception, in the late 30s, he's, the idea of cattle design is quite well connects quite well to eugenics, and actually, so he, after 1897, he gets nominated back to Vienna. He goes to Vienna, and he stays until the very death in Vienna, and then he's also there not only working about cattle but also with humans and human intelligence and so on and so on. He is there in various kinds of Rassengesellschaften, eugenic societies, and all the stuff. And when he dies, his obituary is published in Völkische Beobachter. So, it's kind of an unexpected turn, but not that unexpected. In any case, he's still cherished in Poland. He's invited several times to Poland. And here are the photos from 1934, which is, I think, the last time he was in Poland. And this is actually the last 10 minutes of my talk, the last two entanglements. The first one is the Red Menace. So why does Adamec gets invited 1934 to Poland at all? It is because there is an action for propagation of red Polish cattle, that it should be the leading cattle for Vilnius region as well. Basically, as I said, it's an endemic cattle for Western Galicia. And in the beginning of the 20th century, there is an idea that it actually should be transported. It should be the leading cattle for the whole Galia. And then in the interwar period, there is an idea that it should be the cattle for whole Poland, basically. At some moment, actually, that works. So at some moment, every second cow in Poland is red Polish cattle. But it has, of course, people who are against it very fiercely, and who are also saying, like, if you are saying that the main point for the red Polish cattle is that it's a local cattle, then how can you, with the same argument, say that, in the Eastern Galicia, we'll bring the red Polish cattle and we'll kind of, destroy the local cattle we have, and then in Vilnius exactly the same. And they are very rightly saying that it's not very rational, because the reason for the red Polish cattle to be accepted in Western Galicia is because there is not enough food. But you have enough fodder, you have enough food in Eastern Galicia, you have enough food in Vilnius region as well. So there is a bigger debate about it, very political debate, called the Red Menace at the very end. And exactly 1934, Adamec is invited to be one of the experts who is, showing that actually what happened is should be that red Polish cattle should be there also in Galicia. So this is like, I always make it that it's very similar to professors from Galicia, from the Jagiellonian University, who also after the First World War go ship to all the other universities in Poland, kind of destroying the local knowledge which is there. So in this case, we have a very similar concept of a certain colonization, which is debated there, which is also a way of entanglement and exchange. And the second point why this travel is interesting is because only half of the travel happens. Adamec is supposed to make a tour through half of Poland. Starts in Warsaw, then goes to Vilnius, and then on the first day of his travel in Lviv, he gets kicked by a bull and lands in a hospital, and that's basically the end of his travel. And that brings me to the last point, which is the point about agency of animals. I mean, who knows what would have happened if he would continue his travel? Obviously we don't know why the bull kicked him. Maybe it was exactly because Adamec was turning Nazi. Maybe Adamec touched the bull in a very inappropriate way. This we will not know, but we know that something happened, and that was the agency, that was the choice of the bull to make the kick. This is actually kind of a discussion. This is again a very interesting theoretical discussion. How can we as historians tell something about agency of animals? And this is also why animal studies, they are there in historiography, but they are rather there in ethnology, because you have a much easier access to the sources, especially if you want to make kind of interesting historiography, which is really looking, trying to make stories through the cattle's eyes, for example. If you would be thinking that this is a kind of postmodern leftist idea that animals should have an agency, the answer is, well, you cannot be more wrong, because in the discussion ranges at least to the Middle Ages, where there is a very intensive discussion about, it is actually about pigs eating children. Now you have, it's the end, I can get fired now. So now you have animals eating children. And this is actually a discussion whether, who has the agency if an animal, and who has the moral responsibility if an animal is a child? Is it the animal who ate a child? Or is it the owner of the animal who is actually responsible? Whom should you punish? And since the animals are very often owned by quite rich people, the rich people have money for lawyers who do very good arguments. So there is a lot of arguments, discussions, and so on in jurisprudence in the Middle Ages until we are 2024, until 2024, and in theology. It is also a very theological question. So not only leftists and postmodernists and vegetarians are interested in animal agency, but also theologians. My solution at the very, very, very beginning, I wanted to make it actually kind of more interesting, make as much cows agency as I could. And there is a paper which is actually, on which this talk is based, which kind of brings the agency of the cows a little bit more to the foreground. But the choice which I found very interesting, and I think that is something that we can talk in the discussion, is the idea of interagency. This is basically the only thing I have written on my thing. It is by Vincent Deprez, 10 years ago. The idea is that, we cannot access the agency of the animals and say what the animals want, but we can say that humans also don't have a full agency when they are acting with animals. So we don't have a full agency. We are always responding to what the animals want. So there is a kind of discussion and communication which is happening. And I found that very interesting because as soon as you have this idea, then you look to the sources of how much people have to respond to what they think. What they think animals want. Animals can actually make statements, although mostly their statements is dying. If the humans did something wrong, the animals will die. But sometimes they will just simply run away or whatever. So there is there are voices of animals which you can actually extract when you are looking at this. And I found actually very interesting that there is a lot of literature exactly about red Polish cows, probably about all the cattle there is, which is actually kind of discussing how should we be, in a way friendly to animals, and how we should take their interests and their well-being into account. It's not, and it's exactly the interesting things. It's not only their well-being as so that their meat is perfect at the very end, but it's like, for example, that if they don't get a sunburn. Or that they don't sleep while copulating. There is actually a literature about how a bull should be held during copulating. It should be a shady place. It should be a very firm place, and so on and so on. And these manuals are actually kind of very interesting source for seeing how people are actually bound to the animals which they're rearing. And basically the last entanglement, which I found very interesting. So it's not only humans which are shaping the history of Polish red cattle, but it's the animals as well. And while here they will a little bit in the foreground, I do hope to develop the project a little bit more and to show, make much more an animal-led narrative out of it. Still doesn't work. Thank you very much.